This is day 18 of the 30-day Excel challenge, and we're looking at XLOOKUP functions today. So the XLOOKUP function behaves like all the other lookup functions like VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and INDEX MATCH. However, there are a few problems with these lookup functions. So first of all, VLOOKUP only searches from left to right. That means the lookup value has to always be on the left side of the column that contains the data we're looking for. So if your lookup column isn't on the left, then VLOOKUP will not work. And if the structure of the columns change, the VLOOKUP function breaks because it relies on the column numbers being the same. And next, HLOOKUP only searches from top to bottom. So the lookup value has to always be above the data we're searching for. So if your data isn't laid out in rows, then HLOOKUP is not going to work. And index match is good, but it can be too complicated to use. So in fairness, index match actually does solve some of these problems, but it can be complicated to understand, and it forces you to write two formulas and then combine them as one. And that's not always easy to work with. However, XLOOKUP fixes all of that. So with XLOOKUP, you can look left or right and up and down on any table. So remember, VLOOKUPs only look from left to right, and HLOOKUPs only look from top to bottom. But XLOOKUPs can search for the value in any direction. And with VLOOKUP, you don't need any column numbers. So something like VLOOKUPs force you to give it the column number to pull data from. So XLOOKUPs skip that completely, because all you need to do with an XLOOKUP is you just need to tell it where to look, and it's going to extract the data for you without you giving it any column number. So with XLOOKUP, you can use one simple formula. So if you remember index matches that we mentioned, index matches need you to combine two functions together, and that can be confusing, especially for beginners. XLOOKUP does the same thing as index matches, but you're doing it all on one single line, and it's easy to write, and it's easy to fix if anything goes wrong. And with XLOOKUP, you can still use it even if your table changes. So something like VLOOKUPs will break if you move a column because it relies on column numbers. But XLOOKUPs are more solid because it relies more on the column names and the cell ranges and not the positions. Now, how does an XLOOKUP function work? So in other words, how many arguments does it have and which ones are compulsory, which ones are optional? The first argument is the lookup value. So what value are you searching for? The first argument is the value you are searching for. The second argument is the lookup array. So where should we find the value? That's where you specify the row or column it should look in. The third argument is the return array. So what row or column contains the answer? That's where you specify where the results are found. The fourth argument is the custom message if it doesn't find the result, and that's optional. So it allows you to create a custom or friendly message if it doesn't find the results, instead of you having the typical NA message you normally see in Excel. And the fifth argument is the exact match, and that's optional too. So the fifth one allows you to choose exact match, appropriate match, and wildcard match. So by default, it's set to exact match, which is what you want most of the time. So you don't actually need to change that. So let's try XLOOKUPs on actual data. So what we have here are a list of employees and the departments they belong to. So how would we use XLOOKUP to find out which department an employee belongs to? Let's just paste in a random employee ID into the employee ID field. In department name, we're going to type XLOOKUP. So remember, the first argument is the lookup value. So we're going to select F2 because we want the department name for that employee ID. The second argument is going to be the range where we search for that value. So that's going to be in employee ID column. So we'll select all the values inside there. And then the third argument is the column where we want the results returned. We want the department name for this employee. So we're going to select all the values inside the department column. Then I'm just going to close that and then hit enter. So employee number 2 is in the HR department. So what happens if I just change the employee ID? If I change to employee 1, as you can see, it's IT security. So what we're telling Excel to do is look for this employee, which is employee number 1, inside this column. And then once you find it, return whatever is in the same row, but in the department column. That's what this XLOOKUP function is telling Excel to do. So let's flip this around. What if we want to find the employee's name using their department instead? So the VLOOKUP function would have required us to have the department column on the left somewhere for this to work, but it's not. The XLOOKUP function doesn't care. Whether it's on the right or on the left, it will still work. So we can use it for this example. So what we're going to do is we're going to type XLOOKUP, and then the first argument is going to be the department name. The second argument would be where we want to find this lookup value in. So it's going to be all the values within the department column. And then the third argument would be what we want returned. So it's going to be a name and it's going to be within the name column. And let's add the fourth argument. So we're going to add a custom error message too. So if this doesn't work out, what message do we want to see? So let's type couldn't find an employee for this department, let's say. Then we'll close that. And if you want, you can add a fifth argument, but XLOOKUPs by default will return an exact match. So you actually don't need it. But for the sake of this example, I'll just put 0 for exact match, even though it's redundant. And then I'll hit enter. And there you go, Lisa Patel. So let me just zoom out a little bit. What happens if we enter a department that's not in this list? Because remember, this employee name, it's only returned because it's looking at the department name. So if I was to type in, let's say marketing, there we go. It's returning our error message. Couldn't find an employee for this department. So it looks like the XLOOKUP function works. So if I was to type in, let's say finance, as you can see, David White's name returns. If I was to type in, let's say the data team, couldn't find an employee for this department. So the XLOOKUP function works. We're getting our friendly error message instead of the usual NA message that Excel returns if something doesn't work out. So let's move on to another data set. So we have a simple horizontal table, and here each row is a column and the access levels are in the rows below it. So keep in mind, not all data is vertical. So this is testing whether we can still do a lookup, even if the data is sideways. So what we need to do is we need to find the access level based on a row. So with a table structure like this, normally would go for a HLOOKUP, but we can still do this with the XLOOKUP. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in, let's say manager into the role field. And then we're going to use XLOOKUP within the access level field. And then for the first argument, we're going to select manager, the one we've just entered in. We want to find this manager within these values here. So we're telling XLOOKUP to look for the manager role within these values we've selected. And once you've done that, return the value that's in the next role for the manager. And then once we close that, as you can see, the access level for manager is medium, and we can actually see that right there. So what happens if we change this to employee? It dynamically changes to low. And if we try admin, it tries high. So it works. So XLOOKUPs can actually replace HLOOKUPs. It applies to horizontal looking data and it applies to vertical looking data, where the headers are on the first row in a vertical table and the headers are in the first column in a horizontal data set. So let's move on to our next example. So here we have a table showing what salary band someone falls into depending on how many years of experience they have. So we have a salary band for someone with a year of experience, someone with 3 years of experience, and someone with 5 years of experience. What if we have someone with 4 years of experience? That's actually not listed in our table. So there wouldn't be an exact match for that person. So what would their salary band be? In this situation, what we need to do is we need to look up the closest value that doesn't go over 4. And that's what we call an approximate match. So let's see what that looks like with an XLOOKUP function. So I'll type in 4 years of experience there. And then I'll type in my XLOOKUP. And we want to find the number 4 in our data set. And we want you to look within the years of experience column. So we'll select all the values within that. And we want you to return the salary band for this person. So we'll select all the values in the salary band column. For the fourth argument, we don't want a custom message. So we'll just type in space and then comma again. And for the fifth argument, Excel normally defaults to 0, which is the exact match. But we don't want the exact match only. We either want the exact match or the next smaller item. So we're going to click on -1 because that helps us do just that. And then we'll hit enter. And that returns 50,000 as the salary band. So because we don't want it to go over 4, it's now matched to the salary band that's tied to 3 years of experience. And that's how approximate matches work with XLOOKUPs. So let's look at another example. So let's say we have a table that records the price of products across different stores. And what we want to do is we want to pick a product and a store, and we want Excel to tell us how much the product is based on that. So Excel is going to need to look through two different axes. So the first one will be the rows where it matches each product name, so laptop and phone. And the second axis will be the columns to match the different stores. So store A, store B, and store C. So we're going to need to use two XLOOKUP functions for this. That means that one XLOOKUP function is going to be nested in another. So I'm going to show you how this works. So I'm going to type, let's say, laptop into the product. And then for store, let's type store B. The first XLOOKUP, what I'm going to do is I want to search for the laptop. That's going to be my first search. And you're going to find the laptop within these two values here. So under the products that we've listed. Now, I'm going to add another XLOOKUP. And this time, I'm going to search for the store that I've mentioned. I'm going to select the cell above this one. So that's going to be G5. And that's where I've just written store B into. Now, I want you to search for store B inside these values here. And then I want you to return the values within here. So I want you to give me the value where laptop and store B intersect. That's what we're telling Excel right now. So I'm going to close the nested XLOOKUP, and then I'm going to close the outside XLOOKUP. And then I'm hitting enter. And there you have it. So the laptop in store B cost me $1,200, let's say. If I change that to phone, how much is phone in store B? It's $750. How much is a phone in store C? That's $720. So as you can see, you can actually use an XLOOKUP inside another XLOOKUP. And that's going to allow you to search across two different axes. Now let's move into our main exercise for today. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the same data sets we used for day 16 and 17, where we explored VLOOKUPs, the HLOOKUPs, and index matches. And we're doing this so that you can compare the lessons and see how effective XLOOKUP is compared to the other lookup techniques we've mentioned. So what we have here is we're working for the IT operations of a company, and we're responsible for tracking which laptops an employee has and security policies applied to that laptop. So the first data set is IT assets inventory, and this simply contains a list of employees, their names, as well as the laptop models that have been assigned to them. And the second data set is the security rules table. And this contains a list of the policies assigned to each laptop model listed here. So what we need to do is we need to fill out each of these fields using XLOOKUP. So we're going to start with asset ID. So we already have the employee ID mentioned. It is a drop-down menu. So we get to select the different employees that are listed here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the asset ID. And once we have the asset ID, it's going to allow us to fill these other values in because the XLOOKUP is simply just going to reference that. So let's start with that. If we want the asset ID, how do we go about doing that? So I'm going to type in XLOOKUP, and our lookup value is going to be our employee ID. Now we want you to find this employee ID inside this list here. So all the employee IDs within the employee ID column. And because we want the asset ID, we want you to return any of these values that match the employee we've just given you. And then if we close that, we should get the asset ID for that employee. And that's going to be LAP002. So if I was to just change that to another employee, as you can see, it dynamically changes and the asset ID is actually correct. So let's move on to the laptop model. We want to return any of the values here that match the asset ID that we have listed here. So how do we do that? Let's type in XLOOKUP and we want you to find this asset ID. So let's click on that cell and we want you to find this asset ID inside this list here. So we'll select all the values inside the asset ID column. Now, what do we want returned? We want returned the laptop model. So we're going to select all the values in the laptop model column. Now, let's just say it's not able to do that. So what will happen in this case? We want you to say unable to find laptop model for asset ID mentioned. And then just close that. And then we'll hit enter. And there we have it. So if we manually type an asset ID that is on the table, what will happen in this case? It will dynamically switch to that. But what if we add a asset ID that's not in this table? It's going to return a custom error message. So if I was to, let me just scroll to the right. As you can see, it's unable to find laptop model for asset ID mentioned, just like we specified. So let's just undo all that. Let's zoom into this. And then let's actually bring this over here so that it's easier for you guys to see. Right, so the next thing we need to do is we need the maximum login attempt for this laptop. And because we have the asset ID and the laptop model, we can actually get started with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the XLOOKUP function again. And we want to search for this laptop. Now, where do we want to search for this laptop? We want to find this laptop inside the security rules table. But where specifically do we want to search? We want to search through the list of laptops over here. So we'll select all the laptops. Now, once it finds the laptop, what do we want returned? We want the maximum login attempts. So we're going to select all the values next to the maximum login attempts. And then we'll just close that and hit enter. So for this type of laptop, you're only allowed 6 attempts at most. So if you try to log in more than 6 times, it's not going to work for you. That's for employee 108 with a Lenovo Yoga laptop. If we switch this up, what's the security policy for 102? You're only allowed a maximum login attempt of 3 if you have the MacBook Air. And that's what employee 102 has. Now let's find out if this employee has VPN access. So let's type in XLOOKUP. And we want the laptop model once again. And we're going to find this laptop model inside this list here. And then we're going to select all the values next to VPN access. And then just close that and then hit enter. And according to our security policies, anyone with a MacBook Air is not allowed VPN access. So what happens if they have a Dell XPS 15? They are allowed VPN access. That's how you use XLOOKUP functions. If you do want to practice this further, check the GitHub link in the description below, and you're going to find that it leads you to an Excel workbook where you can practice XLOOKUPs a little bit more. So, what are the key takeaways for day 18 for XLOOKUPs? Use XLOOKUPs to find answers in any direction, whether that's the left of a table, the right of a table, or up a table, or down a table. And avoid XLOOKUPs when you're using older versions of Excel. Well, to be honest, XLOOKUPs are not available in older versions of Excel. So anything before 2016, you're probably not going to find XLOOKUP functions. So in these cases, just stick to VLOOKUPs and index matches, and you'll be just fine. And that brings a close to XLOOKUP functions. I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you stay blessed.